Welcome to the final sci-fi book project part 7. This is the final tutorial in the series. We're going to cover everything that you need to know. So in this tutorial, I'm going to go over very quickly all three documents, what you need to have. So the first one here is what we already had completed. We had the whole vehicle collage with painting, with some fire or lighting effects applied. With just a simple background, I added a little bit of a gradient here just to kind of give you a background, a little bit more depth, and to emphasize the coolness of the lighting effects. But basically, this will be one file you turn in. The other file you turn in is the ship in a landscape like this, and then the third example will be the entire book project here. So I'll go over the book project here first, just to go over some things. So once you have your entire landscape, you can then bring it over as a copy, which I did, and put on its own layer. Then you just type out the text and create a style effect for the text, or pick a font that relates to whatever kind of cool sci-fi. Mine's just simply called Vehicle Invaders, kind of a silly title. You can use lorem ipsum filler type for the content. I use the Star Wars lorem ipsum filler type. I thought that was kind of fun. And then you just kind of want to find some book publisher logo and some sort of barcode online. You can use those. And then design the layout of the book to represent something that feels sort of sci-fi. In my case, I use these sort of warning stripes that go across everywhere, and lots of black and orange sort of theme because the landscape kind of has that in here. So all three documents are what you're going to turn in. So let's cover the last bits on the landscape, how we did this. So if you think about it, the landscape here, you have land, you have shadow, we have some dust elements, some smoky dust in the background. So I'm going to go over some of these effects. I also did a camera raw filter, blur gallery filter. So I'm going to turn off this whole layer, and I'll just kind of drop down on my stacking order. Actually, I'm going to collapse the properties palette, make it easier to see here. So we're going to start off with, let's turn off the vehicle completely here. And actually, let's collapse the entire vehicle and effects. Let's look at the background here for a moment. So I have this cloud surf filter here to kind of fill in some of this area here. I'm going to show you how I did this. Essentially, just create a new layer, which is next to the trash can here, and then pick a couple of colors. So for the foreground and background color, so I picked one color, kind of a bluish green color for one color, and then I swapped it by clicking this little arrow and then double click on the other one. And you want to pick a darker color of the same kind of spectrum perhaps, but darker version, so maybe a darker kind of blue here. And then click OK. And so you have two colors here. And then you go to the filter menu, go down to render, and choose clouds. And this will create a cloud filter. You can see it here. And then to hide it, all I did was hold the Alt key and click, or the Option key on a Mac, and click on the mask, and that would create a filled mask. If you create a mask just by clicking on it, then you can just hit Control I, which will invert that mask, so you get the same result. And then just use a soft brush at a low opacity, like 30%, and white is your foreground color. And wherever you paint, basically start to bring in that kind of dust, and that's how I got kind of like a smoky area here in the distance. Then you could actually bring it out in the foreground if you want to, some areas. The other thing you're going to do is add a cast shadow. And the dust elements here on the ground, there are sites like textures.com and I think I googled some dust too to find some other free sites that have dust elements. So all I did was collage them in here. And you've kind of seen that with textures, but basically just masked them off. So let's bring back the vehicle here, and we'll look at some of the other things that are going on here with the whole vehicle. So the first thing that's going on here is this motion blur. So what I did is after I brought the vehicle in, I wanted to apply a motion blur to it, and but before I did that, I wanted to create this cast shadow here. So I'm actually going to show you how to do that. What you can do is control click on your layer of your merged copy, and if you don't have a merged copy or a group like I have a group here that's converted to a smart object. All you gotta do is select the top layer of that and make sure you have your backgrounds turned off, and then hit Control Shift Alt E, and that will give you a merge copy. If I did that right now, I'd get a merge copy with a background, so I don't want that. But you can see it sort of doubles up the exposure of everything. But what I can do now is Control click that as a selection, and then add a new layer here, and then fill that in with whatever color I want with Paint Bucket. And so I chose this sort of darkish color here and clicked in here. And then since it's on its own layer, I can hit Control D to deselect, and then Control T to go into free transform mode, or Command T on a Mac. And if you right click in here, you can go down to flip vertical. And what that'll do is I'll flip it the other way around essentially. And so I basically just brought it down like this into an area I liked. And then I right clicked in here and I went to skew. And with skew, you have to zoom out a little bit. So you hit Control minus or Command minus on a Mac to zoom out. And then you just grab a corner of this and kind of skew it out. And grab a corner and kind of skew it out. So basically that's how I got that effect here. And then once I liked it, I hit enter or return on the Mac. And then basically at that point, then I would drop the opacity of the layer, and that would give me some of that transparency. The final thing I did was to add a blur to it. So the actual shadow, let's see, is this layer? Yeah, so this layer is my shadow layer. One good thing to do is to name your layers. So I'll rename this shadow now, so I can see it there. So one thing you can do with your shadow is you can blur it, but I do recommend making it into a smart object first. So I right click on here, convert to smart object, then it'll be a smart filter. Then I went to filter blur, and I just chose the Gaussian blur here, and I cranked it up however much I thought was appropriate to kind of soften the edges, and then click OK to apply it. The nice thing about that is you can turn off and on the effect to kind of compare. So basically I did that, and then the other thing I did was after I had the shadow and the dust elements, then I decided to blur the actual Sci-fi vehicle itself. So with that layer, we can go actually, which is right here, we can turn on the motion blur and see the effect. But after I right click and convert to a smart object, I basically went to filter, blur, and then chose motion blur. So it's in the blur gallery here, motion blur. And I can open it up since it is a smart filter and double click on it, and you can see the effect here. Now I have a mask on here, so I have it cranked up quite high, and I'll turn off the mask temporarily here by holding the shift key. But you can see what I did is I blurred out the whole image, and then with this mask I just painted in black in the areas I wanted to bring focus to, and so that's how I got that effect. So once I got some blur action, what I wanted was more of a blur kind of action for the arms and the distance, a little bit in the engine here, but for the most part I want other areas to be kind of in focus. After that I brought it all together, and let's turn on this layer here. Combined it into another smart object, duplicate the layer. I always like to duplicate layers when I'm doing adjustments to the image, just to try out different things. And with this one, what I did was I had it already as a smart object, and I basically brought it into a blur gallery, and the blur gallery created an iris blur effect, which I can turn on and off, or I can double click on it to see what it looks like here. But it's basically a giant circle, the iris blur, that you can kind of move in and out, and you can adjust the influence of the blur. So I have a blur 15 here. I increased this light bokeh, which is kind of like these glowing sort of spectral lights that kind of happen, and some bokeh color effects here. And then I add a little bit of noise here, crank that up, and then I just clicked OK to apply it. And so those are the effects I applied. Then I went to, and I already have it here as a smart filter, the camera raw filter, but I went to filter and clicked on camera raw filter. And so I can just double click on the camera raw filter to open up camera raw. There's a few effects I applied in here. I added a little bit more exposure and contrast here, and then I clicked on the sharpening. I added just a smidge of sharpening. And then I went to split toning here, and this is a real fun area because you can change the highlights and the shadows based on the color and the saturation of those, and do a nice cool kind of split toning here effect. And so I just increased those a little bit, and then in the lens correction I increased a little bit of vignetting. So I drag this to left a little bit to create a vignetting effect. You can see it there as I drag that over. And then finally I agree with slightly more grain in the FX, and that was it. And I just clicked OK. I'll go ahead and cancel out because I like the effects I have applied here. But those are kind of like final effects. If you zoom in here, especially the grain kind of evens out the sort of tone everywhere. But that basically concludes the project. Once I had this done and finalized, I saved out the JPEG version to bring into my final composite here. So again, you'll turn in three projects. One, the vehicle by itself. Two, the vehicle in landscape. And three, the vehicle in the final book layout. So this is the final tutorial. I hope you enjoy this. Until next time, see you soon. Cheers.